Our next speaker for this morning is Lieutenant General Stephen Boutelle, U.S. Army retired. He is now the Vice President of Global Security and Defense, Cisco Systems Incorporated. Lieutenant General Stephen Boutelle is Vice President of Cisco Global Security and Defense that advises government and commercial customers on business practices and technology solutions. Before joining Cisco, Lieutenant General Boutelle served as the Chief Information Officer of the U.S. Army, responsible for the Army's worldwide use of information technology. Bringing us this morning, cloud privacy and data sovereignty. Ladies and gentlemen, let us put our hands together to welcome Lieutenant General Stephen Boutelle.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to address this group. I have to tell you, listening to Admiral McConnell, who I've known for many years from a distance, because I was a lieutenant colonel when he was working for Colonel Powell on the Joint Staff, and also to Mr. Saito and Ms. Tan, you will not find very many of these forums, and I've done probably thousands of them, that you get the insight that you receive from the people who spoke before me on what's happening in the world. I will say that, yes, I was a CIO. It was a long time ago. I didn't know I'd be a lieutenant general on here. A CIO is, at that time, was emerging, the Chief Information Officer. But I would like to say that in the early 1900s, they also had vice presidents of electricity in major corporations. And the CIOs are already moving into a different environment from what they were when I was a CIO. And the CISOs are evolving, and they're getting involved in application development and architectures, which they should be, and the CIOs moving up to be more of a policy level. So a CIO is a great thing at a certain time in career, and I'm sure being a vice president of electricity was a great thing once upon a time, but this is a fast-moving environment. I'd like to talk a little bit about a couple different things. I'd like to talk about that 7,000 tons of gold somewhere under the streets in New York and the bank and our banking system. I'd like to talk a little bit more about where we are and how we got into the cloud and what the changes are taking place in the commercial sector and the vendors over the last 5 to 10 years, not only at Microsoft and Cisco and Amazon Web Services, but what we see being driven by a geopolitical process. And yes, our systems are penetrated. All of them are. I know a bunch of you are sitting out here saying, mine's not. Look, as CIO, I had the largest networks in the world at that time. Your systems are penetrated, and there are people on the inside or outside that are currently addressing and assessing your data and deciding what they want to do with it. You have to get over that, the average organization, 200 to 300 days when they realize they've been penetrated. But let's talk a little bit about how we got to where we are in cloud. And I enjoyed the presentation by Ms. Tan and the data centers. And you know, the first big data center I saw at Microsoft, and I was born in the state of Washington, is in eastern Washington when Microsoft and Google built massive data centers in the Columbia River because they were next to a hydroelectric dam, and electricity was about 2.4 cents per kilowatt. And in Silicon Valley, it was about 12 cents, and I think in Seattle at that time, it was 12 or 14 cents. We located these facilities where we could get cheap data and we could cool them. We didn't locate them with any thoughts on personal data, information, geopolitical systems, what data could reside where, sovereignty. It wasn't even in our mind. It was where do we put these things that they could operate the best, they had connectivity, and was really the low price of power and could be cooled them. We moved from that into a cloud environment. Now we call it the cloud. We've had cloud equivalents for many years, but we're really in a cloud environment today. And we've moved from a cloud environment, pervasive information, I call it the world of perfect information, into a private cloud, because then we decided we wanted private clouds, and then we wanted hybrid clouds, and then we have government clouds that are classified, and we have unclassed clouds, and secret clouds, and top secret clouds. An awakening was when the CIA in the United States awarded a cloud contract for global access to Amazon Web Services. You mean the cloud could be secure? So we've been moving down this road of a world of many clouds, and we cannot uninvent the cloud. The cloud brings so much to us economically, agility, so many things. But let's talk about how much money is being spent on infrastructure in the cloud today. If you look where we are today, traditional IT infrastructure is pretty stable, running $65 billion a year. cloud IT infrastructure is moving up at a gradual rate and is almost equaled infrastructure build. If you look at global IT infrastructure spending, if you look at traditional IT, public cloud, private cloud, and sovereign cloud, and let me define sovereign data cloud as that cloud which is directed to be held within a sovereign entity, be it a country or a group of countries. That is massively changing what Microsoft Azure has had to do, what Cisco's had to do in Amazon. My data can no longer reside in different countries if I am of certain nationalities, and we'll talk about that. So we've moved to a sovereign cloud, and we're starting to see that about 10% of data share of spend is sovereign data clouds. Now, where's this going? It really is scalability, speed, flexibility, cost saving. We all know why we like cloud. I can plug in anywhere, and I want to plug in anywhere. I want to do my banking and pay my bills when I'm in Singapore. But I can't do it on my iPhone unless I launch a VPN because my bank won't let me because it geolocates my IP address. Not everyone has a VPN on their phone. Most civilians do not have a VPN on their phone unless they build one themselves, buy a router with it, pay for it. They aren't there. But the demand is there for universal access to data anywhere in the world, anytime, any place. That is contrary to where rules, regulations, national, and groups of nations are driving us. Now, as we move in the attack surface from the public, private cloud and the hybrid cloud, we start to see something that's almost counterintuitive. A private cloud has the smallest attack surface. Okay, the public cloud's a little larger, and the hybrid cloud, which all of us say we like, and I work on the commercial side and enterprise as well as governments, they want some stuff held really private, on-premises, and then they want to expand into that public cloud as needed. And you end up with a huge attack surface when you do that. Now, it's about personal identity information, it's about sovereignty, it's about protection, it's about privacy. It's all about trade-offs. What are we going to do in the trade-off space? My generation is not going to answer this, but the younger generation and our children are. They are going to have to put up with what decisions we make over the next few years. We have massive things happening in the cyber world, and we will talk a bit about that. But attackers are already inside your network. You have to get that through your organization. You have to get it through your people. We will be driven to cloud by budgets. There's never enough money in any corporation. IT has been considered an add-on. We build the system, the CIO builds the system. We bring the CISO in and tell him, fix it, plug all the holes, make it work, make it secure. Until we get out of that mode, we will not solve this in any way, shape, or form. But our people will demand that global access, and the dilemma will be security and regulations of different countries. Now, we like to gather data. We like massive amounts of data. I like data so I can comb through it and decide which ad to send you, how I can make money. If I'm in the intelligence community, I like massive amounts of data to look for stuff. So is data an asset or a liability? If you have data, and I said on there, several nonprofits, one of them has 1.2 million records of a particular group of people, 600,000 records they've never accessed. 50 of the records are people over 104 years old. Is that data an asset or a liability? I met with our insurance people the other day. Do you know we pay for insurance based upon how many records we own and have, so in case it gets stolen and somebody hacks on it, it drives my insurance rates up. So is it a liability or asset? The first thing I would say is get rid of all the data you don't really need. The person in the corner says, I might need it someday, I want to keep it, get rid of it. It's a liability to you in the commercial sector, and in the government, it can be a liability too. I'm not sure where it's concerned about it. But your data can be a liability or asset, and we have to look at it that way. Now, it's all about access. And it's about sovereignty and localization and encryption. And we've heard a bit about encryption today. We haven't heard a lot about sovereignty. But different nations are driving us to totally change the models in industry. They want access and convenience. They want privacy and security. That's a hard balance for industry. How do you do that? That's a very hard balance for industry. This is some of the things we're seeing. As we move from keeping stuff in our desk or our safe, locking it up, to keeping it in a computer on your desktop, to move it into cloud. These are the questions we need to talk about. As we look at this piece, we start to say, how is this affecting us individually? And the comment this morning about the gold in the bank in New York and the system that moves that money around the world is the SWIFT system, the Society for Transactions, Financial Transactions. I think there's about 11,000 banks that belong to that. In February, if you followed it, Bangladesh almost lost $1 billion, and that's a lot of money for Bangladesh, through the SWIFT system for several reasons. And I think the one who did the investigation was a Mandiant company, which is called FireEye. When they looked at the SWIFT system itself, it's a system to 11,000 banks that ties the banks together, that moves money around the world, including out of the big bank in New York. And in Bangladesh, someone did not have a firewall on their banking system, no firewall. The switches they bought were secondhand, and they bought them for $10. And they were infected by malware with someone from the inside or the outside. The hackers tested the process of getting in and out of that bank, and it's still undetermined whether there was an insider involved or not. But before a 3-day weekend and a Muslim holiday, they dropped 34 transactions to move $1 billion out of that bank, which was to be run through that 7,000 tons in gold in New York. They normally only do 2 to 3 transactions a day. And that money was to go into Sri Lanka and into the Philippine systems, into the casino systems, which are exempt from some of the money laundering laws. The people piece is the piece that gets us first. 98% of the issues you have are the people piece. And we see that, and you see it periodically with the HVAC systems at Target, with Best Buy, obviously with OPM, NSA. We've all seen the people piece. In this case, when those 34 transactions came in, and by the way, your money does not move digitally around the world. It moves by email. It moves by email through the SWIFT system. It's about to move digitally with something called blockchain, but that was just demonstrated in New York back in March to the big banks. Emails that went to move that $1 billion hit New York on a Friday, and they didn't look at it on Saturday, and they didn't look at it on Sunday because nobody looked at it on Sunday. It was a Muslim holiday on Friday. Person on call came into Bangladesh on Saturday. His printer wasn't working. He tried to print out the SWIFT printer. Nothing would work. Rebooted it. Nothing would work because the hackers had taken it down. So he started sending emails, but he didn't know who to send it to at the SWIFT system in New York, saying cancel all the transactions, but there was nobody on the other end. He found a website on the SWIFT website to send some emails, and nobody answered. On Monday, they came in. There was a stack of printouts in New York, and they worked their way down through the printouts. And 3 or 4 in the afternoon, they saw $1 billion in movement of money across the world out of a place that normally has 2 to 3 transactions a day. In fact, they only moved 95 million. They were able to recuperate the money from Sri Lanka. The money that went into the Philippines never was seen again. It was tracked through several places. Attribution is hard. We talked about that earlier. There is a potential the attribution came out of North Korea, but they have not been able to finalize that. But the point is, yeah, there was a technical piece. There's a massive people piece. And Janet Yellen and the Fed have been all over this, and they haven't solved it. There was nobody to call on the weekend to tell them that somebody just pulled $1 billion out of my checking account. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because in Switzerland this year, now remember, there's 7,000 tons of gold roughly. They won't tell you exactly how much under the ground in New York. 1,400 tons of gold were delivered to Switzerland in some new businesses where they've taken the military underground bunkers and converted them to places to store gold. And they have airstrips next to them, and some of them have high-end condos next to them, where people fly in bulk gold from around the world to store it, I would say because some of the credibility of our banking system is at risk. There was a special on this I just watched, and they talked to some of the people that are running these underground storage areas, and they said, we're turning people away. Out of every 5 people that come in with an airplane full of gold, we're turning away up to 3 of them because we don't like their looks. We're not sure we want to be involved. They are putting that gold there at 1,700 tons in the first 6 months of this year. There's only 7,000 tons in New York, or plus or minus whatever that is, because of a credibility issue of where do I put my money and trust a banking system. Now, whether or not gold will be a good medium, if the system collapses or not, I don't know. But obviously some people think it's very valuable to have their liquid assets in gold. It comes back to our cyber security, our systems, the credibility of our networks that go all the way from critical infrastructure to health and medical and changing blood types to changing things in databases that can massively implode any corporation or military. One of my greatest fears when I was a CIO G6 was somebody messing with a few bits and bytes in my Oracle relational databases of where all my things were around the world and what ended up on what airplane and what ship. You don't have to do something massive. You can do something very small. So we have a huge thing we have to work on. Now, how do we do some of this? Each nation is driving us in different directions. And I'm looking at this from the Cisco side. Microsoft, we call it co-opetition. We cooperate with them and we do things together, and sometimes we compete. And Amazon. But each one of these nations has different sets of rules of different level of stringency on what I can do in data in their country. Does the data have to stay in their country about their people, their personal data? Can I move it back and forth? What about all those data centers we put in Ireland? About the data centers we put in Iceland? About the data centers we've got in China? Now I'm talking about some of the companies I work with. The data we have residing there is no longer, in some cases, legal according to the laws of that nation. So it's causing us to massively change, based upon the country that we're operating in, what we do in the cloud. It's no longer, I'm going to build the cloud in Vantage, Washington, because it's 2.5 cents a kilowatt per hour, and there's a bunch of fiber coming in and a hydroelectric dam in the Columbia River. Doesn't work anymore. Now, let's so as you look at these countries, we're starting to see evolve out of different countries, different regulations, different groups of countries of what we can do, where we can do it, and how we can do it. See if this comes up right. Some of the first ones were safe harbor between the EU and the United States. And after being sued by a young college student, Safe Harbor became Privacy Shield. It'll probably change again before we figure out what we're going to do with it. But that was those data centers that Google and Amazon and Microsoft and others had in Europe, and what data was stored there, how it was protected, what nation it was in. In Asia, we have APEC, which is the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, which is put together. It's about 20 or 30 nations who have decided that each nation would decide and notify another nation of how they would handle data. Now, as a vendor, we're trying to figure out how to sell into this market. I work very closely, and I'm the executive sponsor to a lot of militaries around the world. Germany data's got to be in Germany. Next question, and if it's secret data or geheim data, it's at one level, and it goes all the way through the gambit. That data is not going to be anywhere else. Oh, by the way, you can't reach out of data to update your licenses on your software. You have to have a system in Germany, and not only Germany, a bunch of other countries, that updates the software, that doesn't reach out of the country. We're going through this in all around the world. Sometimes it's groups of countries. We cannot afford, none of us could afford, to do an on-premise solution for every single country we deal in. So industry has this issue that they're going to have to solve, and these laws are changing very quickly, and these rules and regulations. It's very hard to keep up with. Now, how do we cut through the fog on some of this? I think the first thing is like being in a bank. If you're a banker, do you know where the doors are and the windows are? We are operating in an ecosystem today that's the same. It came out of DARPA, it came out of the internet. It's pretty much the same for everybody. And it's a complex one. I hope this comes up. You know, we have to deal with endpoint users. This is all of us. We have roaming users. We have, this is a slow build. We have DNS, which tells us where to go for stuff. We should have recursive DNS, which blocks about 98% of your ransomware. And that's a DNS that tells you, and you can block things by IP addresses, you can block ports, you can, when somebody comes in, they can't go to it. We have firewalls. Now we have next generation firewalls, which look at the applications as well as just blocking ports. We have identity services, and I used to feel really good about this. My thumbprint I love in my iPhone. I can go to my bank. I can do all kinds of things. And Kat Kaspersky in Russia came out last week and said there are now 10 companies that can capture a fingerprint and sell it and use it. So if your biometric gets sold and you don't have it anymore, I guess you have 9 more fingers, okay? And they have 2 companies that can capture your retina scan and reuse it. Okay, there's only 2, but if you lose an eye, that's one of them, that's a little more serious. So biometrics, which we thought was going to be the panacea and the answer to so many things, is turning out to be another stop along the way. Now, Microsoft will tell us that that thumbprint doesn't go off the phone, and nobody, or Apple will tell us nobody can get into the phone, unless you get a small Israeli company after the St. Bernardino incident who gets into the phone. So we don't have the solution set. It's not biometrics. Biometrics is a stop on the way for identity. What's the solution for identity? There's a whole bunch of them out there today, and where Cisco bought TrustSec, I got it, and Identity Services, and we all use biometrics, but there's a whole bunch of places that we need to go in the future for identifying individuals. VPNs, virtual private networks, like I said, that's how I do my banking from here. That's part of the ecosystem. An administration who's got to keep track of all this stuff. You've got the data center. I got a couple more got to come up here. And then during attacks, you've got a whole bunch of other pieces of IPS, next generation IPS, web and email security. Now, every one of these you'll find on the floor out here has to fit in one of these blocks, and they probably do. Cloud access security. When I was out here a year and a half ago and I was meeting with the MINDEF and they said, have you got a solution for security in the cloud? My answer was, I didn't give an answer. I will tell you today there are cloud applications that will give you security in the cloud. The issue is, where does the data reside according to the geo rules of different countries around the world? That's driving us more now than the ability to secure the data. Web and email, we use AMP, malware analysis, sandboxing. I'm losing it on my own acronyms. Flow analysis, how we sandbox it, what we're doing, what the different vectors are. And the one thing that every system has to have is global threat intelligence that will allow you to make changes to your system in machine time. Governments don't like anything touching their system in machine time. They don't like anything tied into it. And if they're classified systems, they really don't like anything tied into it. So most of the agencies take that, they put it on a computer, they go all the way through it, they run it through a system, they take it in an hour, a day, a week, or a month later, and they update their systems based upon global threat intelligence. These are the pieces that when you look at your bank and look at the doors and windows, if you don't know all these pieces and have all these pieces, you cannot mitigate the threat. You're not going to stop it. If anybody walks into your organization and says, my product will keep you safe, 100%, it's time to throw them out and look for somebody else. There is no single company out there or contractor that can give you 100% safety or address everything on here. And if they can't address everything today, in 30 days or 60 days, the criminals, the hackers, the non-nation states and the nation states will find attacking on another vector, on something else, and some other small company will pop up to help you mitigate that. This is a journey. The question I get when I go into governments, and I deal a lot with military, say, what product do I buy to fix all this? What product do I buy to fix it so I can walk away and just write a check? It doesn't work that way. This is a long-term thing that we're all going to deal with for a lot of generations. So if I look at who's in the space, and this is only a couple hundred of the companies, these are the spaces that the companies are in that you need to be looking at in order to do the things on the previous chart. And you can walk through them, and you see a lot of them appear everywhere. Juniper, 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 Microsoft, Microsoft. They're all over because they know that those are the spaces that can protect you and your systems and mitigate processes. Now, I would like to stand up here after 9 years at Cisco and say, Cisco engineers all this and builds it all. Cisco bought 14 companies this year, 180 companies in the last 26 years. They're really good at buying companies and putting stuff together, so they've been looking at this. And they went out and bought a bunch of companies. Oh, it's not on there. I guess they're circled in the last one, and you can see they bought a company in each space. They bought OpenDNS, they bought Stealth or Landcope for Stealthware. They bought a whole bunch of these, and they have put together their portfolio. But having said that, there's got to be a mix and match. You've got some of these products in your infrastructure today. If you don't like one in this area, try another one. Now, I can say that one thing Cisco's done is based on open APIs. You can rip ours out, put Juniper's in. You can rip somebody else's out, put ours in. Find somebody that you can move in and out of your architecture so you can stay up with the threat, which is evolving, okay? And make sure you're doing all these pieces. This is the ecosystem you have today to defend your systems. It will change, but it's going to be really, really slow. So if anybody walks in and says, I can fix everything you've got, all your problems, you have a significant issue on how you get them out of your office and talk to somebody else. Thank you very much.